On Agenda this week, we ask whether Tynwald needs the moral and spiritual leadership provided by a bishop. With our current bishop stepping down this year, Joney Faragher MHK is hoping to gain Tynwald's support to remove the bishop from Tynwald. We'll hear from MHK's Daphne Kane and Jason Moorhouse later in the programme, but first, Joney Faragher. So, you've also got a motion on the June Tynwald order paper to look at the position of the bishop. Obviously it's a timely motion, bearing in mind that the bishop has announced that he will be stepping down from the role.
Yeah, that's right. And as you say, really, this is just kind of taking an opportunity that presented itself. I think we have so many complex, big issues facing us right now that perhaps constitutional structural reform of the composition of Parliament, of Tynwald, is not necessarily at the forefront of everybody's mind. But this felt like it was an opportunity that had presented itself and that could, if it's the will of Tynwald, be resolved fairly rapidly, with the fact that the bishop is retiring and the Church of England won't be looking to appoint another one until, well, at the earliest, I guess, October. So if this motion is the will of Tynwald and does pass, I feel that will bring us a step more in line with a sort of full democratic mandate of the whole of Tynwald.
And what would you say, I suppose, then to critics who would say, well, of course, if you do this, we will probably end up losing the historic role going back to St Mackled of a bishop in the Isle of Man?
Yeah, and I take that point, and I think it's definitely a consideration. But for me, I guess what the Church of England does is sort of up to them. And if that is what they decide, that the diocese is not to be any longer, then I guess that's kind of their call, would be my view. But also, I think there's always some reason that some traditional reason that we can hold on to not progressing and not moving forwards. And I think we have to kind of weigh those up. Which is the most important? You know, do we value the sort of fundamental tenet of democracy in terms of the being the people's voice and the people electing who's in our parliament, or do we value the tradition of having a diocese? Which one is the most important to us, I suppose?
Other parliaments seem to manage, though, with unelected members, bishops and the like. I mean, why would we need to be so much more different, bearing in mind the bishop is only one of 33 in Tynwald, and effectively he doesn't tend to sway debates very significantly. He just adds a kind of a moral and spiritual dimension to debates.
It's interesting the way that you phrased that question there, Phil. So first of all, how do we know that he doesn't sway? Do we have any proof from it? I think that if he doesn't sway anything, then okay, what's the point of having him? But first of all, but secondly, the fact that you've kind of added in that he adds a moral or a spiritual dimension, I don't think that any religion or anybody, any group of people in any way has a monopoly on morality. And I think that I personally, as somebody who doesn't have a religion, feel that it's important I have a deeply held sense of morality, and I don't need a religion to sort of tell me that. So I think it's quite important to remember that morality is not down to affiliation with any group or otherwise. It's your individual conscience and what you feel is important. And I think I have a lot of faith in the fact that if you stand for public office, you want to do it for the right reason, and you have a deeply held moral code. And actually, I personally feel like having a look at the start of Tynwald or at the start of the House of Keys at the Nolan principles would be a lot more helpful to a lot of us than taking a prayer to a God that not very many people in our society still actually believe in. And to me, it would feel like that would be more representative of people as well.
In terms then of the debate, have you got any indication so far as to whether you're going to get support from members?
No, I haven't, to be honest. I think that a lot of people are waiting to see how the debate actually goes. I think that there will always be a sort of quite vehement group on each side. So I think there are a couple who are very, very strongly opposed to this. And then there are a couple who are very, very strongly in favour. But the vast majority of people kind of think, well, it's absolutely right that he shouldn't really have a vote, and we do want to improve democracy, etc. However, they don't necessarily want to offend people, or they don't want it to be taken to at the point at which it becomes an issue for the electorate, or that they upset people. So I think that people are gauging opinion from their electorate, from their voters, I suppose, over this time. And I'm really looking forward to the debate. I really hope and I believe that it's going to be a respectful debate of all faiths and all belief systems, and that everybody can try and engage in it in a really sort of genuine way.
And if some helpful or perhaps mischievous, depending on your outlook, amendment arrived to your motion suggesting that, remove the bishop's vote but allow him to continue to be part of Tynwald, would that be something that you could support?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately my goal would be to have the composition of Parliament as being people who were representatives of the people, and that, you know, Legislative Council at the moment are indirectly elected, so they still do have that mandate. However, appointees in our Parliament, to me, seems opposed to the fundamental tenet of democracy. So as far as I'm concerned, I would not like to see appointees at all in our Parliament. However, if it is the will of Tynwald, I think that, you know, there will be an amendment to say that the role remains but the vote is removed. That will be a small step forward. It's not as much of a step as removing appointees from the composition of our Parliament, but I think it would still be a small step forward that I would be, you know, pleased to have been part of.
Tynwald does have a habit of shuffling forward when it comes to constitutional reform, so perhaps a shuffle is better than a bold step.
Well, I mean, I think, yes, a shuffle is always better than no steps whatsoever. I would agree with that. Personally, I'm all about the bold steps. So as far as I'm concerned, I would like us to take a bold step of saying we do not agree with the principle of appointees in our Parliament because it opposes democracy. And I would like to see us make that step. But a shuffle, like I say, is better than no steps whatsoever.
That was Joney Faragher. What does Daphne Kane think? So we've heard there from Joney Faragher MHK. She's got this motion to Tynwald effectively to remove the bishop from Tynwald completely. Her colleague in the Manx Labour Party then has an amendment which is that all appointed members, as in unelected members to Legco, so that basically means the bishop, and indeed, I suppose the Attorney General is a member, but he already doesn't have a vote, that they wouldn't have a vote, but they would still be appointed. Where do you stand on this?
In the previous debate, actually, we had the functioning of Tynwald, and we had an amendment then to remove the bishop from Legislative Council. I think it is a very established principle that the functioning, the politics, the church should be removed from the political scene and decision making. But I appreciate that the established church has had this position since, I think, democratic Parliament came into being on the Isle of Man. So there is a huge tradition there. I also, I feel a pang at the loss of tradition, and I have celebrated, as many have, that our Diocese of Sodor and Man gave the island to the Thomas the Tank Engine and friends, the island of Sodor, even though the Southern Isles part of it doesn't feature anymore in our actual jurisdiction. But I would feel very strongly that the head of the Church of England should not be appointed and have a vote on our Parliament. The current bishop, as previous ones, make excellent points, contribute to the debates, but it boils down, do we think that we need that ethical and moral sounding board? Do we not have ethics and morals ourselves as elected members? I appreciate that it's controversial. There will be those who absolutely insistent that tradition, we had a lot of it in the recommendation from the committee that I brought, that we remove prayers before every keys sitting. And it was, I'm not religious, but tradition is very important. I think as we evolve as a society and as a nation, it's right that we look at these things, that we debate them, and we consider what is appropriate for the way we organise and operate our parliamentary sittings and island life. So it will go to a debate. My own view is the bishop really shouldn't have a place within our parliament. It's the established church of the Church of England. But I appreciate that the Liz Vane report found very firmly that it should have. Then the functioning of Tynwald was the third report. I think the functioning of Tynwald included a letter from the Archbishop of York at the time, John Sentamu, saying pretty much that removing the bishop's vote would reduce the role to that of similar to the deanery within the Channel Islands. And there is that threat there that we could lose the diocese, we could lose the bishop by taking such action. But I would feel from a parliamentary perspective, we shouldn't be blackmailed by that. That is a matter for the Church of England. We should look at the proposals before us and determine in our own minds and from the community, and I welcome members of the community to get in contact with me with their views, what is appropriate for our nation and for our parliament.
And of course, Maccled is in your constituency. St Maccled, since St Maccle's time, which was, I forget the exact century now, was it the 8th century or the 7th century, something like that? Since the time of St Maccled anyway, we know that there have been Manx bishops. So your view is that if, as a result of any change to Tynwald membership, the Church of England had decided not to have, or not to appoint a Manx bishop, that's a matter for them rather than a matter for Tynwald to be concerned about.
I think Tynwald should be concerned about the makeup of our parliament and the appropriateness of the ex officio roles of the people we appoint to contribute to our debates. And I think it's entirely appropriate that once in a while that comes up for debate, and the membership of the current parliament determines where they stand on that. And I think my views are well known from the previous debate, but it is difficult because it's tradition and it's wrapped up in so much to do with the Tynwald Day ceremony, and we're not suggesting that should change at this juncture. I just think that in terms of membership of the Church of England as well, is only one church on the island, and obviously there's a very strong Methodist tradition. I think there was a time, I remember reading in the last century, where the Methodists were very upset. It was the Church of England that had the bishop on there instead of another religious leader that might have been more relevant to the Isle of Man population. So if the Church of England, that's for them to determine. I don't think that should have any sway over what we do, and perhaps we should have a Church of the Isle of Man or the Manx Church Bishop of Soda and Man if it's removed by the Church of England.
The heritage argument, if you use that properly, you would say that it was wrong to allow the general public to start voting for MHKs. What a terrible thing that was. The destruction of the sensible parliamentary system that we'd had for so many centuries. Heritage is an interesting thing to look at.
I think we all need to evolve, and as you continue that, you might consider that there's going to come a time, perhaps, when should the population vote for the members of the upper chamber and the chief minister. You know, we are all there to serve the people in everything we do. There is a boundary commission ongoing.
And you are a political leader, so tell us, should that happen then?
I've had a paper which Professor Peter Edge kindly researched for me on the possibility of having the population elect the Chief Minister on the Isle of Man. I have to say it didn't win a huge amount of support from colleagues at the time, but I think these the fact that the way these things keep coming back is because it's not resolved, and we all strive to serve the people. So I think that in all of this, my mind is open to listening to the community, but how much of a clamour is there that we should look at the parliamentary makeup of Tynwald and say it's appropriate or otherwise for the bishop to be there, to have a vote, and indeed the risk or the threat of having the diocese removed and having a bishop in post after hundreds of years of tradition on the island. Should that determine how we move forward? Because, as you say, otherwise we'd still be appointing executive council and we'd still be having self-appointed members of the House of Keys. And I think we've come on a lot since 1860s, and I think in the 2020s it's time that we look to the future.
That was Daphne Kane. Does Jason Moorhouse agree with the motion? There's an interesting motion, several interesting motions on the Tynwald order paper, including your own, but the one particular one which will potentially cause a radical change in terms of the position of a bishop on the Isle of Man, maybe the first time that we will not have a bishop for more than 1,000 years.
Yeah, it's concerning because it is so integral to the way that Tynwald works in terms of the debates, in terms of the reflection, in terms of the history, all the core things. The bishop is one of the key components, and to actually start looking at this, you think, what will be next and why is it being done? You can become super efficient and just get the computer and thing to decide for us, but there are times we need to step back. You need to look at the wider issues and just actually think about what's in front of you. And I think the bishop is good at directives to do that. Surely
in the 21st century we should have people who have some democratic credentials, and having people who are merely appointed to Tynwald and having a vote somehow doesn't seem to fit in with the fact that we are now in the 21st century and people expect their political representatives to have some kind of democratic legitimacy.
Yeah, it's a tough one, just in terms of where it sits with the rest of the Legislative Council and the way in which they're chosen by members of Keys. It's, a challenging one. And when you actually look at the members of Keys, we were actually chosen on one day at one time, and things change over time. So to actually be reflecting what the people are thinking all the time is going to be very, very difficult. But in terms of the bishop, he's not just being parachuted in, he's actually representing a group of people, he's representing that Christian chain of thought, is coming at it from a non-political perspective. And I think that's important, that we actually have some balance. And in terms of reflecting on the issues we're debating, it can add quite a lot.
There are, though, many different groups on the island, none of which, with the exception of the Anglican Church, have an appointed member in Tynwald. Are we suggesting that only the Anglican faith is worthy of such an appointment, or are there other community groups on the island that perhaps need similar representation?
I think in terms of tradition, in terms of him representing the largest group of people who follow religion at the moment on the island, there are reasons for that. But I think it goes beyond that. I think it goes it's especially powerful in terms of things like the morality, the reflection, and the way in which is not actually representing the church as such, is actually representing a morality and a way in which things can be considered and looked at. And I think whether it's the bishop or some other religious leader, they're coming at it from quite a similar perspective. And given that we've actually got someone carrying out the role and we get other benefits as a consequence of that we've got a bishop on the island, I think to actually look at this without looking at all the separate impacts of removing the bishop, could result in us making a mistake.
I suppose there's a number of points that I'd maybe try and pick you up on then. Effectively, you're saying that the bishop provides moral leadership in Tynwald. Does that mean that Tynwald members don't have any morals?
I think the problem is that when you're debating, you become very one-sided. You've got constituents who are directing you in a certain direction. You've got just the general mood. You've got the things like the basic agenda that you're following, and there's a lot of times where you just need to kind of stop, look at what you're doing, and consider the wider aspects. And I think the bishop is good at allowing us to do that in a constructive way, and it's something that is within the system. When we became members of Keys, we knew he was there. He was doing a good thing, and whether it's a man or a lady or whatever in the future, I do think it's an important aspect of tradition that is as significant as the religious aspect, the morality aspect, and all the other aspects. I think that tradition and having a bishop on the island is a powerful thing.
And the other side that is promoting this motion suggests that actually it's not Tynwald that will be deciding to end having a specific Manx bishop in the Isle of Man for the first time in possibly 1,200 years, but it is actually going to be the Anglican Church, if they choose to do so. It's their choice.
That's it, and that's something they're going to consider. We are a small area, and the bishop is representing a small number of people, and as a church has to look at cost savings and efficiencies. We are going to be up for consideration, whereas at the moment, we've got a bishop in the legislature, a bishop who's active within the community, a bishop who's active in the wider society, I think we're in a strong position in terms of keeping the bishop. But if we do bring these changes in, then there are going to be questions asked and the possibility that change will happen. Daphne
Kane suggested, and sadly I didn't pick her up on this when the interview was taking place, suggested that maybe if the Anglican Church decides that they're not prepared to appoint a bishop, maybe we should break from the Anglican Church and establish a wholly Manx church instead.
Well, I think that's to be a challenge and perhaps a step too far. It's one of those things that it's not broken, so why mend it? It does work. There are a huge amount of benefits, and I just think that, on the Isle of Man, tradition is so important, and it may not be perfect, the traditions we've got, but some of them are worth fighting for. I think this is one of those things.
But there are traditions, things like the birch, capital punishment, having directly appointed members of the House of Keys, not allowing women the vote. These were all traditions at one point.
That's it, and times change and people change, but we do need some level of constancy, and I think in terms of the bishop, he's there offering that link with tradition, but also that element of going forward and looking at the wider issues. And one of the words he mentions quite often is healing, and I think that's quite important, in the cut and thrust of politics, to have someone there who's actually focusing on healing and resolving tensions and just making us see things as they are rather than as we think they are when we go into the chamber, when we're wound up and trying to get a certain thing through or resolve. So I think it would be a sad day if we lost the bishop, definitely.
That was Jason Moorhouse. So, do we need a bishop? Will we fall into a pit of moral decline without the bishop's moral and spiritual guidance? Do changes in society and community in recent decades mean that organised religion is no longer an important consideration in Tynwald? Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gorn at manxradio.com, and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget, this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now though, I'm Phil Gorn. Goramayo. Thanks for listening.